Laudetur Jesus Christus. This is Father Ripperger of Superior to Society, the Most Sorrowful Mother, and Spiritual Director of Liber Christo, inviting you to join the instructors Kyle and Dan, and now your host, Jesse Romero, at the Liber Christo War College, where you will receive instruction and briefing on Catholic spiritual warfare.
I want you to listen to a small little lecture given by Father Chad Ripperger, exorcist, and the Superior General of the SMD, where he's going to talk about power and authority defined by the scholastics. Mr. Engineer, can you play the clip?
So it's the same thing in relationship to spirit and to any kind of warfare. When you go to if you're in war, they have castles. They used to have in the past, they'd have castles or certain things, certain forts and things of that sort that were built up to withstand the attacks. And that's what authority actually is. It's something that God establishes to not just to provide, but also to protect, but also even protect the one who's engaging or using the authority. So it's all designed to keep the people protected in relationship to not just physical dangers or moral dangers, but also spiritual ones in relationship to demons. So that being said, then because the demons understand it, demons always work off the objective. Always work off the objective. They don't care what you think. Their own, except insofar as how they can manipulate and use that to their ends. They don't care about if you happen to feel like I should get to do this, or they don't care about the fact that, you're taking delight in the fact that your prayer had some effect, which we'll talk about in a minute, and therefore you've had a limited amount of success. They don't care about how you feel in relationship to that. They know the structure, God holds them to it, and they know they have to work within the confines of it. And so they work off the objective. This is one of the reasons why going back to what the church has always taught in these matters is actually key, because it's worked it out. The theologians, philosophers throughout history have worked out precisely what authority is, precisely how it functions, and in the context of spiritual warfare, it's just a matter of making the application, which we'll see here. So the first thing, therefore, that I want to discuss in depth is the nature of authority itself. And then within the context of that, I'm going to discuss how the demons attack in specific areas in relationship to that. Okay. The first distinction we have to make is between authority and power. In a book that was written recently, it actually states, and actually it talks as if authority is the same thing as power, or power is the same thing as authority. And it actually, in one of the author's follow-up letters, he actually states that power is authority in spiritual matters. And the church itself has never, ever held that position. They've always made the distinction between power and authority. Okay. And demons are kind of hoping, this is something that you'll actually see with demons. They're more than happy to take a beating at your hands if you're misusing your authority or you're misusing power. They're more than happy because, okay, so they're suffering a little bit, but in that process of your misuse, they're gaining greater control over you. And this is something that you see, we'll talk a little bit about this, the collateral damage we're seeing in people who are engaging in certain activities when they don't have the proper authority. Okay, first, the definition. This is one of the problems that you'll actually see in relationship to a variety of people writing in this area. Nobody's defining their terms. And if they are defining their terms, they're very loose and they're imprecise, and they don't really reflect the literally thousands of years of reflection upon this and the precision that's come from that. Power is defined in general as the ability to do or make. It's the capacity for acting. So it's the ability to do something. It's a principle of acting. What does that mean by principle? It's the source. It's from which the acting actually comes. So it's the principle of acting upon something else. So power is the ability of one thing to affect a change in something else, in some other thing. So this ability to affect that change is distinct from the right to use that power or the right to make that change. Okay. And that's where authority comes in. So authority, which by the way, that the idea that power is authority is the same principle as might makes right. Might is just another name for power. So might makes right, right? Might gives me the right to actually do these things. And we're actually seeing this, I'm not talking about just what happened in Nazi Germany, which was their entire philosophy, and it's actually based upon the Nietzschean idea of will to power, that it's really about my imposing my own power and will upon somebody else. It's not just that, although that's what demons really want to do, ironically. It's a little bit different than that. So one of the authors that is probably highly important, I'd really recommend you buy 2 books. They're by a guy by the name of Wollner. It's W-U-E-L-L-N-E-R. The first one is called The Summary of Scholastic Principles. And it's really important to actually have that because demons are principled. They understand the principles and they act according to them perfectly, with the exception of their disordered will, which even itself has a very definite structure. The second thing is he's got 2 books, A Dictionary of Scholastic Philosophy, and then I think he's got another one, maybe it might be by a different author, just called A Dictionary of Dogmatic Theology. And it's in that. So what's the definition of the term definition? Well, definition is the formulation of the essence of a thing. It's the nature of the thing. We want to get to the nature of the thing, not what we think about it, not how we feel about it, not what we would like it to be, and not what other people are saying about it, but what is the actual formulation. And formulation just means the words that we use in our minds to understand the nature of the thing. Okay. He defines authority as the moral power to command or enforce obedience in a community. It's a moral authority, it's a right granted by the moral law to impose obligation. Ligare. We get binding prayers from that. The word for in Latin for to bind is ligare. So, and when we are binding demons, what we're ultimately doing is we are obliging them to do something. Okay. So it's a moral authority, a right granted by the moral law to impose obligation on the acts of others. So we're going to unpack this a little bit. In this definition, we see several things of note. First of all, it's a moral power. What does that mean? It's grasped by reason. As a society degenerates, which we're seeing in our culture right now, as our culture is becoming literally more insane, it's literally becoming more insane. It's literally becoming more and more irrational. The things that people are saying, the things that people are doing are literally becoming more and more irrational, and it's becoming very pervasive in our society. I'm not suggesting that a majority or everybody in the culture is mentally ill, but what I'm suggesting is it's becoming more and more pervasive, and you see the behavior in relationship to this. Why is that important? It's important because Aristotle says that as long as a person has use of reason, they can always understand the first principles. That is, they can understand principles. And from that, then you can reason with them to get them to a certain point. But if people lose the use of reason, become mentally ill, not necessarily in all forms of mental illness, but when they become mentally ill, their ability to think rationally and to process stuff according to principle breaks down. Okay. So one of the first things that the demons do is attack people's reasoning process. How do they do that? Well, the principal way they get it, and this is something subtle, but it comes actually from original sin. When Eve, which by the way, I don't mean to beat up on Eve, Adam did the same thing and even worse. So when Eve ate the fruit, her choice of the fruit, so it says she looked at it and it was pleasing to the sight. In other words, there was emotional delight that she got out of looking at this thing that was contrary to reason. Once she chose that, to take delight in that, she corrupted the preternatural gift of integrity, which kept the lower appetites in perfect subordination to reason. This is why we have emotions that are all over the map and why reason can easily be affected by them. Once she ate that, that meant that she corrupted that thing, and then once Adam did it, it passed it on to the rest of us. Once that happens, all of us are now stuck in a situation where unless we develop an extraordinary amount of virtue and unless we really work on the reasoning process, we are far more likely to follow how we act based upon our emotions rather than reason. So let's parse that out a bit. What that basically means is that after original sin, 99.9% of people, even the choices they make, even their reasoning process, most of the time is governed by emotion. That's ultimately what, if the emotions come up and it's contrary to that, the person will avoid that. You see this all the time in cases of possession. The demon is constantly trying to drive the person or get them into a state where they're following their emotions. Why? Because the demons have access to the emotions, and that means they can control the person. They can manipulate them. Manipulation, even when it's for other people's good, unless it follows very specific principles, is diabolic, ultimately.
You've been listening to Liber Crystal War Caller Situation Room. I've got Dr. Dan Schneider. My name is Jesse Romero. We just heard a lecture from Father Chad Ripperger where he talks about power and authority defined by the scholastics. This is a huge topic, Dr. Dan. I'll tell you why, because I like the way Father Ripperger started this, where he talks about spiritual warfare. He goes, think about a castle or a fortress. It's meant to protect those within the structure. I love that because that makes sense to me, because I look at the church as a castle, a fortress to protect us. I look at the diocese as a larger castle, a fortress to protect us. I look at my house as a castle and a fortress to protect the Romeros. So there's different levels of this castle that God has given us to protect. And Father Chad Ripperger, Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, basically he's going back to, as I read the Desert Fathers understood that spiritual warfare was most effective when it was fought using monastic principles. Comments, Dr. Dan?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. The fathers of the church have been battling Satan and writing about the war with Satan. In fact, the Catechism itself says that man's entire existence from the beginning has been one of dour combat. It says in the Catechism. What was really mind-opening for me as well when I heard this talk originally by Father is how authority, we tend to think, okay, this is scholastic, he's a Thomist, and so he's a professor, teacher, etc., as well as an exorcist. But he said something very